Welcome to Diplomatic Perspective on Global Television, coming to you live and direct from the nation's capital, Abuja, Nigeria. It's another time again for us to talk about West Africa. You know, all the while we've been talking about things happening around the globe, but today we want to look at ECOWAS at 50, the Economic Community of West African States. We want to look at that. The celebration is on. You know, for us in West Africa, ECOWAS is one body that everybody hold at a very high esteem. Don't worry about the fact that some persons actually left, but how are they really doing? All of that will form basis for our discussion today. My name is Ramsey Enoch Agbo, and of course, on Diplomatic Perspective today, I have someone who is actually a researcher who has done a lot of research in the past. She is the head of Research Conflict Research Network West Africa, and she's also a lecturer, at Base University in Abuja, Nigeria. Her name is Ebimbore Sefa. It's good to have you join us on the program, Diplomatic Perspective.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
Well, we're looking at West Africa. Are you proud to be in West Africa?
Absolutely, absolutely. This is my subcontinent. This is my home. Absolutely, I am proud.
That's good. So you must be also be proud of ECOWAS too.
I would, to a certain extent, I will say I'm proud of ECOWAS.
ECOWAS is 50. What's your perspective of ECOWAS?
Well, in the last 50 years, ECOWAS has been quite active in the region. I mean, when you look at the start date, 1975 was when the regional bloc was bettered. And when we reflect on ECOWAS in the last 50 years, we see how they have impacted the economy and also expanded from the economic activities down to peace and security, good governance, and democracy. So I would say that ECOWAS has made some great milestones or great achievements in those three categories.
All right. Let's look at the activities of ECOWAS now. What are the activities of ECOWAS? A lot of people know that ECOWAS is the economic community of West African states. That's the coming together of West African countries to form the bloc. A lot of people don't know the activity and the importance of ECOWAS. So can we look at that? What's your thought about that?
Okay, so I would like to group them into three categories. I will start with the economic, because based on the history of ECOWAS, ECOWAS was bettered with the objective of economic integration. The member states of ECOWAS realized that in order for them to compete and also have access to advantageous trade benefits, it was very important for them to form a regional bloc. And that was when economic integration came into the forefront. So merging the markets, but more importantly, allowing members to have access to large markets, free flow of goods and services. And ECOWAS has actually achieved that to a certain degree. And now we now have people being able to move freely, goods and services within the West African countries. But more importantly, we also have ease of setting up businesses. So that is why when you go to countries like Nigeria, Ghana, Togo, Abidjan, the rest of them, you find that you have other citizens or other nationals of West Africa setting up and setting up shops there. So that is one aspect. But unfortunately for ECOWAS, a few years into its economic goals, as I will put it that way, they realized that there is a link between development and security. So if you are looking to enhance the economic environment of West African states, if you are looking to set up infrastructure or any other physical forms of development, it was important that security was taken into consideration. So ECOWAS has expanded from economic activities down to peace and security in the region. And of course, we have seen their interventions in the civil war in Liberia, in Liberia, in Sierra Leone. We have also seen some of their interventions in the Gambia and Cape Verde. So they have been quite active in ensuring peace and security. Although current events would make you question, the effectiveness of ECOWAS, but don't forget that ECOWAS was supposed to be an economic regional body. Other effectiveness or other activities of ECOWAS we can point at is the the political activity of ECOWAS as well. So ECOWAS also realized that to strengthen the economies of nations within its area of influence, it is important also to promote good governance and democracy so that the economies will be strengthened. And so ECOWAS came up with a series of mechanisms and protocols ensuring that countries were encouraged to adopt good governance practices. And we see that with the 70s, 80s, and early 90s, we had a rash of military coups across the region. But when ECOWAS got involved and expanded its economic goals to good governance, we realized that a lot of those coups, the era of coups was over. But again, the last 6 years or so has told a different tale. But they were largely able to ensure that governments were able to transfer power from, power transition in a seemingly non-violent way without the military getting involved. And one of ECOWAS' goals in terms of peace and security was to avoid interstate war. And since 1975 till date, we've not had 2 countries going to war within the West African region. So there are some milestones or effectiveness. Of course, there's also the social aspect of it as well. Thanks to the free movement of goods and services by ECOWAS, we are able to exchange culture. Now, people might downplay the relevance of culture, being able to appreciate or tolerate other people's religion, or will I say languages and food and clothing and music. And we see that largely amongst West African states. We don't deal with the issues that we see in South Africa of xenophobia. Yes, you might have your little skittish between Nigerians and Ghanaian in terms of jollof rice. But at the end of the day, we have this, this culture, interchange of culture, thanks to ECOWAS.
Well, that's good enough. While you were talking about security, so many things came to my mind because we have the president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria as the chairman of ECOWAS, and we'll have a pocket of security issues in Nigeria and other countries. Not just Nigeria, security situations are all over the world. But now, coming to security and peace in West Africa, apart from the issue of ensuring there is no war and interstate conflict and all of that, do you see ECOWAS doing so much in the area of curbing insecurity?
Yeah, in terms of being innovative in its, will I say, normative rules and regulations or coming up with strategy, ECOWAS has been quite very effective in that area. For instance, when we started dealing with the issue of terrorism, in the early 2000s, ECOWAS came out with a counterterrorism strategy. The 3 Ps: prevent, proactive, and prevention, and the other one as well. So, to a certain degree, ECOWAS has been quite effective in terms of getting the necessary paperwork done, setting up the necessary agencies, the early warning systems, which we are very much aware of, and also the calls for a standby force. The early version of it was ECOWAS monitoring group, which we are aware of. But in terms of actively engaging with violent extremism in the region, in terms of having boots on the ground, ECOWAS has not been able to fully leverage on that. Some scholars have argued that it is due to Nigeria's insistence on dealing with the Boko Haram insurgency by itself, and also the presence of other blocs like the Multinational Joint Task Force, which is a collective security arrangement between Nigeria, Cameroon, Niger, and Chad. And also the defunct G5 as well, which Niger, Chad, Burkina Faso, Mauritania, and there's another country, I think Mali. Yeah, Mali. So the presence of those other blocks kind of ensures that ECOWAS doesn't have to actively take a physical role there, but setting up the necessary framework or legislation to ensure that these criminals are brought to book is what ECOWAS has been effective in. And not just for violent extremism, other criminal groups as well, trafficking and smuggling and small arms and light weapons, those critical issues which have fed or sustained violent extremism in the region. So I'm very much aware that ECOWAS struggles to have that standby force to deal with that issue, but the conversation is ongoing. I know in the last year, especially, ECOWAS has been having that particular conversation regarding having a standby force. Funding is also part of the problem as well, because it's quite expensive to maintain an ECOWAS standby force. But ECOWAS has been very instructive in terms of intervention. For instance, when we remember the Mali coup in 2012, the Mali coup, as well as the the separatist movement of northern Mali Azawad, we saw ECOWAS taking a lead, of course, with support from the United Nations and the AU, putting boots on the ground and, actively engaging with the rebels in that region.
All right, that's quite interesting. You made mention of Mali and the rest. Now let's look at the exodus of the likes of Burkina Faso, Mali, and of course Niger. What do you think about the role, all right, that ECOWAS played in their exodus? And that will take us to the challenges of ECOWAS. Do you see that as a challenge for ECOWAS? Because some persons are of the school of thought that these persons were aggrieved. They were not satisfied with certain things and they had to move out. Can we look at that as a challenge? And then we will also look at the role that ECOWAS actually played as it has to do with their exodus.
Well, in every regional organizations where you have a large group of member states, there are always different competing interests: national interests, regional security interests, interest of their allies, interest of their competitors. So these are expected. Now, regarding the perception of the AES states in terms of their discontent or dissatisfaction with ECOWAS treatment towards them, there is some form of legitimacy to that particular claim, because I recall sitting in one of these ECOWAS regional meetings, and members of some Francophone African countries, in particular these three, had alleged that ECOWAS was not very supportive in the war against violent extremism in their states. In fact, they argued that ECOWAS did not even contribute a bullet towards that particular war. So that is one of the grievances, because they needed some form of real life support. Simply saying we condemn the actions of certain groups was not enough for them. One of the grievances. Now, don't forget that ECOWAS is comprised of both the Francophone and the Anglophone states. So you already have this issue of differences. Like, for instance, now, be proud to when these three states broke away from ECOWAS, each of them had some form of defense pacts with France, right from the end of the colonial period. So France was going to provide some form of protection or security or defense. They do help with their military training. And that also speaks to the amount of influence that ECOWAS can have in whatever collective security decisions that these countries have to take. And so that means that in as much as ECOWAS might be willing, the willingness of ECOWAS to help has never really been questioned in that regard. What has been questioned is the action it takes in terms of meaningful participation in engagement with these groups of people. So the AES states saw that as a problem. And also ECOWAS' initial response to its military coup was seen as too aggressive by the AES states. But granted, when you look at the treaties or the agreement, there's an agreement that military regime or taking power by force would not be accepted. ECOWAS is also constrained by sovereignty issues and domestic politics. That is true. But there's an agreement both at the AU level and at the ECOWAS level that taking power by force would not in any way be tolerated. So I agree that perhaps ECOWAS' aggressive stand of telling Niger, I think Niger was the last one, that if you do not, revert back to civilian regime, we would invade, was very aggressive and send a certain message to the AES states that ECOWAS perhaps did not care about its own grievances towards its former colonial powers, as well as its grievances towards the bloc as a whole. So the situation could have been better handled in terms of negotiation, whether back channels negotiations or more formal negotiation channels. But it has already happened. They have already left. And what ECOWAS can do, or what the member states can do at the individual level, is to set up bilateral or multilateral treaties to keep the relations between these countries, especially Nigeria, because we do share a border with Niger and we cannot afford to be at loggerheads with our neighbors. I tell my students, who is a threat to your country? They keep on mentioning faraway, and I say, no, it's your neighbor. Your neighbor is your potential threat because they have access to your back door. So, but ECOWAS as a bloc has been making some soft diplomacy in terms of the treaties of free movement of goods and services is still very much on. So there is that hope that through negotiations, perhaps the AES country would come back.
Okay, that's the next question I wanted to ask. If there's
Yeah.
any possibility of them coming back, but then from your
there is.
research, how are they faring after they left?
Okay, so before I get to the second question about the fair, now we'll talk about the possibility. Now, don't forget that this alliance was formed on one very unique foundation. The first foundation was we are all military heads of states, and ECOWAS doesn't like military leaders. So that is the reason why we are forming this alliance. On the off chance that the military heads of states step down and then we have civilian governments, then that particular foundation is already broken.
But
So,
does military really step down? Do they really step down?
well, looking at the history of West Africa, at some point they would step down in one way or the other. Either they willingly hand over power in the case of our very own Olusegun Obasanjo, or they step down the other way. So, but you talked about how are they faring. So we have seen the case of Mali, and we have been seeing a series of protests in the last few months in Mali. So that's that the honeymoon period of the military regime is over in Mali. They realize that perhaps this military leader is not giving us what we want. Don't forget the presence of the Russian mercenaries as well in Mali. They are there ostensibly to protect the Malians from violent extremist groups or terrorist groups, which is engaging with them. And they're also there to also protect the regime, the military regime as well. In exchange for that, they have some form of access to solid mineral exploration and mining in that particular country. Imagine what the locals of the host communities will feel when they see foreigners mining those products and getting the benefits with them having little of it. And we've seen a series of protests in Mali. So that tells us that the people of Mali perhaps are not on the side of military regime. I can't say so much about Burkina Faso, but I do have a very, very strong concern regarding people seemingly, because I mean, Ibrahim Touari has this following on social media or in mainstream news. It seems as if he's doing a fantastic job. And in less than, how long has he been there? 2-3 years? 2 years or so?
I think two years plus.
2 years plus. In less than 2 years plus, apparently all the problems of Burkina Faso seems to have disappeared, which is quite interesting. So when you are having that prevailing notion that strong men is the solution, then we have a problem. Because one of the crucial problems of West African states is weak institutions. So let's say, for example, Ibrahim Touari is actually a miracle worker. He solves off the problem, but he's a strong man. What happens when he leaves whichever way and institutions are weak? That takes us back to what? Square one. So I do have a strong concern about strong men, because that has always been one of the major problems that we have in the West African region.
All right. We're looking at ECOWAS at 50, and the celebration is intense. It's everywhere, West Africa. Everywhere. ECOWAS is one of our major a major bloc that we have. Now, let's look at the importance. Do you think ECOWAS is taking into cognizance what the average citizens of the West African countries are feeling? Because we've had a lot of complaints, malnutrition in West African states, and so many things happening apart from insecurity that is so much on the rise. Do you see the bloc, ECOWAS itself, taking into cognizance or being concerned about what the average citizens of this West African states are feeling?
Yeah, that's a very good question. ECOWAS is very much aware of this problem. In fact, they had a particular goal, which is ECOWAS not moving away from a community of states to a community of people. That was the 2020 goal, which has been pushed back to 2050. And ECOWAS is very much aware there is a gap between ECOWAS as a regional body and people, West African citizens, and they are working towards bridging that gap. So it is more of a case of having a strategic communication platform for people to be very much aware of ECOWAS. Now, when you look at a similar regional body like the European Union in Europe, when you go to almost every major city in Europe, the airports, major airports in the countries, you would always see the Europe, emblem, the flag, the symbol of EU. How many West Africans recognize the symbol of ECOWAS? Not a lot of them. And ECOWAS is very much aware of this. So ECOWAS has been working with different programs and hoping that by the year 2050, that goal of a community of people would be achieved. It has not largely achieved that goal itself. Now, regarding also its effectiveness at the state level, at the national level, ECOWAS has always promoted a region-centric approach, whether it has to do with economics, politics, or security. But we are beginning to see this crucial challenge or this crucial wave within our subcontinent, this wave of nationalism or populism, which, contradicts ECOWAS' core region-centric approach. And that in itself is a challenge for ECOWAS in terms of having this community of people goal, which ECOWAS rather is seeking to achieve in the West African states. And so, so there is a need for that, restructuring of its goals in terms of the member states itself. There is nothing wrong in member states promoting their national interests. Everybody expects it. But at the same time, too, ECOWAS as a body has to figure out how do we carve out our regional interests in line with national interests so that we can really create this community of people that we are working towards and meet up this goal in the year 2050. In terms of, we like call it grassroots or social development programs, I would admit that, yes, we haven't really seen a very strong ECOWAS presence to that regard. In fact, people recognize the EU symbol, the United Nations peacekeeping symbol, more than ECOWAS presence. We don't really see enough of ECOWAS grassroots programs, whether it's vaccinations or is it free education for little children or giving out food or some form of training. So those programs do exist, but we want to see more of it. And that is where we really have this community of people that we are talking about.
All right. That's interesting. I was thinking about it, and it occurred to me that some persons, okay, if you get into the hinterlands in West Africa, just get to the nook and crannies, the communities and all of that, it appears as if the people are more aware of NGOs who extend these hands of fellowship to them in terms of food, like you talked about, free education and all of that, than ECOWAS itself. You've spoken about that now. So at this point, where ECOWAS is now, a 50-year-old child is not a kid. Can we say ECOWAS is successful at 50?
I would say ECOWAS has somewhat achieved its core goal, its initial goals of economic integration up to a point. Because with economic integration, there are still some challenges. I mean, the transportation challenge, transportation of traveling around the West African countries, I'm sure you are very much aware of it. It isn't so easy to move around West African countries. It's easier to travel to the United Kingdom. And you also get change in terms of the airfare tickets. So while the markets have been opened, while we have tariff reduction or custom duties reduction, we also have difficulties in navigating or traveling around the West African region. So there is some progress to be made in that regard. But yes, the interstate trades are increasing to a certain degree. So there are some success stories. ECOWAS has been, I would give it 75% successful when you look at its initial goals that they had set to achieve. But there's a lot to be done. We want the single currency. We would like to have it. If you want to travel to Ghana now, you'd have to get your Naira to buy dollars, change the dollars back to the Ghanaian currency. And then when you are done with your business in Ghana, you would have to change back your many cedis to dollars, then back to Naira. And even using your credit cards is the problem. So the financial market system is something that we really, not we, ECOWAS, and of course the member states really needs to look into. Because I had a recent experience. I wanted to pay for something and my card was just, it wasn't working. And so I had to start figuring
within a West African state?
Yes, in West Africa. I don't want to mention the countries, but it happened. And it wasn't really nice. But that same card that refused to work in West African states was working in European states. So this is a MasterCard.
Which is supposed to work anyway.
Which is supposed to work anyway, absolutely. So there are some great strides made by ECOWAS. I mean, we should not ignore the milestones. But there's also room for improvements. For instance, the issue of environmental security. ECOWAS has been taking the lead in that conversation in the African continent. There is no other, sub-regional body who has done as much as ECOWAS in terms of climate change issues, the conversations that we are having around it, the amount of money being budgeted for environmental friendly practices there as well. More important, the sensitization, the workshop being organized to educate people. So to some certain aspects, I would say ECOWAS has tried, but should ECOWAS do better? Absolutely, yes. But part of what is hindering ECOWAS is this sovereignty issue. Because at the end of the day, member states are the ones that are able to domesticate ECOWAS mechanisms or ECOWAS treaties in their own countries. So if the heads of state are not willing to or unable to implement those policies, it's difficult. ECOWAS is simply a global governance institution. It cannot enforce,
All right.
it cannot sanction to a particular extent.
Thank you very much for that enlightenment. Well, we're talking about ECOWAS at 50. The celebration is on, and we've heard from someone who is a researcher who have done so much in that area. Many thanks for joining us on Diplomatic Perspective today. I wish we had time so we can continue, because the conversation is really interesting. Well, we'll hope to have you some other time again.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us. All right, this is going to be the size of Diplomatic Perspective for today. We'll bring you more details. Well, ECOWAS at 50. A lot has been done and many more to do. Join us again for the next edition of Diplomatic Perspective. My name is Ramsey Enoch Agbo. Thank you and bye-bye for now.